Hola clase, en este video de hoy vamos a hablar sobre los mandatos informales negativos. So in the last video, we talked about affirmative to commands. And you'll remember that we use affirmative to commands to tell people what we want them to do. So today we're going to be learning about negative to commands, which are just as important as affirmative to commands, because sometimes we want to tell people what we want them to do, and sometimes we want to be able to tell people what we don't want them to do. And so negative to commands can do that. They can tell people what we don't want them to do. As you're going to see in this lesson today, you cannot form affirmative to commands and negative to commands in the same way. So you actually have to conjugate the verb differently depending on whether you're telling someone to do something in Spanish or if you're telling them not to do something in Spanish. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we form negative to commands in Spanish. If you're already good at forming usted and ustedes commands, forming negative to commands is going to be a piece of cake for you, because we're going to follow the 3 steps that we learned when forming usted and ustedes commands. So those 3 steps are: 1, go to the O form of the present tense; 2, remove the O from the ending; and 3, add the opposite endings. Now, the only difference then between the usted and ustedes commands that you formed and the 2 commands that you're going to be forming today, the negative 2 commands that you're going to be forming today, is just the opposite endings that you will add. And I'll go ahead and give it away to you up here by this 3rd step. Today, you're always going to be adding an AS on the end or an ES, depending on what the verb was originally. So let's go ahead and take a look at the table below. So the verb hablar, to talk, it's an AR verb. We're going to do the 3 steps on it. Go to the yo form, habló, take off the O, and then add the opposite ending. And remember, since this was an AR verb, we need to add an ES onto the end. So we just need to add the opposite ending. So hables. Comer, same thing. Como, first step, take off the O. Second step. Third step, add the opposite ending. It was an ER verb, so we're going to add the AS on the end. So comas. If you forget how we did usted and ustedes commands and you want to go back and take a look at that, you can. But this should be pretty easy for you since you've already done this with usted and ustedes commands. Escribir becomes escribo in the yo form of the present tense. Drop the yo, add the opposite ending. Since it was an IR verb, we add an AS on the end, we get escribas. Poner, remember, you've got to know all of your go verbs, okay? So remember, poner is a go verb. We learned 10 different go verbs when we learned our usted and ustedes commands. So we learned, like poner becomes ponga, pongan. Well, now it becomes pongas because when we drop the O and add the opposite ending, since we're in the to form now, we're going to add an AS on the end. But remember, traer would become traigas. Let's see, seguir would become sigas. So you want to remember all of your go verbs, your 10 go verbs. If you forget any of those verbs, you might want to go back and review what those 10 go verbs are. And then dormir. Dormir is a stem changer, right? I'm just going to put stem here, all right, to remind you that it's a stem changer. It is an O-to-U-E stem changer in the present tense, right? And so you go to the yo form, duermo, you drop that O, and then you add the opposite ending, so it becomes duermas, all right, duermas. And so some of those other stem changers that we talked about, like repetir, volver, you're going to want to know those stem changers during this chapter as well, during this lesson on affirmative to commands, because you will be conjugating verbs like that into commands. So if I'm telling you not to sleep, I could say no duermas. No duermas would be a negative to command. All right, so I have some different examples here for when we would use negative to commands, all right? When we might want to tell someone not to do something. And just picture in your mind, think about all of the different times when your parents tell you not to do something, right? Either there's something that annoys them or something that they think isn't good for you or isn't safe for you. And they might tell you not to do something. Your friends, your siblings probably tell you not to do things as well. And so whenever you want to tell someone not to do something, whenever your parents want to tell you not to do something, they're probably going to use a negative to command to tell you not to do that. And you'll always see a no in all of these sentences. There's always going to be a no because we're telling someone not to do something in all of these sentences. And there is an implied to in all of these sentences, an implied you, the informal version of you in Spanish, which is to. Because these are people that we're treating informally. We're friends with them or they're younger than us, and so we can treat them in a casual way. So let's look at some of these examples. No escribas en mis libros. Don't write in my books. That's a great negative to command there. No duermas en la clase. Don't sleep in class. That's a stem changer, right? We had to change the O to UE there. No lleves un sombrero en clase. And so don't wear a hat in class. In our school, we can wear a hat on viernes, I think on Fridays maybe. You will notice that for all of these, we are adding the opposite ending, right? Always adding the opposite ending for our negative to commands. For our affirmative to commands, we did not add the opposite endings, right? So you're going to have to be careful switching back and forth between telling people what you want them to do and telling people what you don't want them to do. When you're telling them not to do something and you're going to use a no in your sentence, then you definitely want to add the opposite ending on the end. The last two examples here, no mires la tele todo el día. So don't watch television all day. Great advice. No pongas los platos en la lavadora. So don't put the plates in the washing machine. They go in the dishwasher, right? Lava platos. And so here, I'll just show you if I wanted to then make an affirmative to command and tell you where to put them. So I tell you don't put them in the washing machine. No pongas los platos en la lavadora. Then I'm going to change my sentence to give an affirmative command and say pon los platos. I'm not going to go ahead and write all of this out. I'll write a little bit of it out. So pon los platos in el lavaplatos. All right. So my affirmative command pon is different than my negative command pongas. All right. So you have to be really careful as you switch between affirmative and negative commands to conjugate your verb correctly, because you can't just interchange these and use whichever one you want. Here's something new in the world of commands that we have not learned yet. So when we covered our usted and ustedes commands, we did not talk about pirate verbs. And even when we talked about our affirmative to commands, we did not talk about pirate verbs. But with negative to commands, we need to remember our pirate verbs, all right? And let me remind you what our pirate verbs are. We learned our pirate verbs in the preterite tense, because in the preterite tense, we have pirate verbs. Pirate verbs are verbs that end in car, gar, zar. And if you say those with the pirate R at the end, you'll see why they are called pirate verbs. And so pirate verbs are irregular when used as negative to commands. So whenever you see a verb that ends in car, gar, or zar, and you want to use it as a negative to command to tell someone not to do something, then you're going to need to remember these changes, these spelling changes that happen. And so for a verb like pescar that ends in car, you're going to change that C to a QU, all right, before you add your opposite ending. So pescar becomes no pesques. So if I want to say, tú no pesques, hey, you don't fish, and then this is how I would conjugate that verb. Empezar, so a verb that ends in zar, I need to change that Z to a C before I add my opposite ending ES. Also be very careful because some pirate verbs are also stem changers. So empezar is an E to IE stem changer. So I need to change that E to an IE before I add my opposite ending. So I'm actually doing three things with the verb empezar, which means to begin. And so if I'm telling you don't begin, maybe I don't want you to start the test. Tú no empieces la prueba. All right. So, hey, you don't start the test. I need to remember to change the E to an IE because it's a stem changer. I need to change the Z to a C because it's a car-gar-zar verb. It's a pirate verb. And I also need to add my opposite ending. So there's 3 things I need to do, and I need to be very careful that I do all 3. The last verb, pagar, to pay, that's an example of a gar verb because it ends in G-A-R. And so I'm going to change the G to a G-U before I add my opposite ending. So it becomes no pagues. Tú, no pagues. Hey, you, don't pay whatever it is that we could be talking about, right? Don't pay the bill. Don't pay him. Don't pay her. No pagues. Right? These are your car, gar, zar verbs. Here's a list of common pirate verbs, common car-gar-zar verbs. I'm going to try not to go into very much detail on these because you can just look at this list. And really, you don't necessarily have to memorize all of these because whenever you see any verb that ends in a car, a gar, or a zar, you're going to need to just do the step, right? Your C changes to QU, your G changes to GU, and your Z changes to C, okay? So if you would forget what these words mean, you're not really going to get stuck because you know how to use them. You might want to pay attention specifically to these verbs, these pirate verbs that are also stem changers. So jugar is a U to UE stem changer. Almorzar is also a U to UE stem, or sorry, an O to UE stem changer. And empezar is an E to IE stem changer, right? The other ones, you just need to remember that small spelling change, but you don't need to worry about them being stem changers. So pause the video, look at this list in a little bit more detail if you need to, but you will want to be able to identify car-gar-zar verbs and then change them appropriately when you are giving a negative to commands. I wish that there were not irregular negative commands, but there are. The good thing is there's only 5, and they're some similar to some of the irregulars that you've seen before. Although you'll notice that they are different than the irregular affirmative commands, right? And this is where it can get a little bit tricky because you have a different list of irregular negative commands than you do for irregular affirmative commands. And you don't want to get these lists mixed up. So dar is no des. Hey, don't give. Estar no estés. Don't be. Ir no vayas. Don't go. Saber no sepas. Don't know. And ser no seas. Don't be. All right. So these are your 5 verbos irregulares para los mandatos negativos. All right, and you'll want to memorize these. Here's a couple examples of these negative to commands, the irregulars being used. So no vayas a clase sin hacer la tarea. You can see ir gets conjugated as vayas here. So don't go to class without doing the homework. No des el libro a Manuel. So don't give the book to Manuel. No pagues a tu madre. Don't pay your mom. No seas malo. Don't be bad. No estés triste. So don't be sad. Just a few examples using these irregular negative to commands. And finally, we do need to touch on pronoun placement. So when we did our affirmative to commands, we already learned that if the command is affirmative, then the pronoun is attached to the end of the verb, right? We put it at the end of the verb. So like ducharse becomes duchate, duchate. So take a shower. But if the command is negative, which is what we're doing today, right? Our commands are all negative. We're adding a no in front of them. Then we need to remember that the pronoun comes before the verb, all right? So, for example, if we wanted to say the same thing to shower, but now we want to say, don't take a shower, then we're going to put the pronoun before the verb. So we're going to say, no te duches, no te duches. And you will notice that we also had put opposite ending here because we had to go through our 1, 2, 3 steps, right? But up here, since it was an affirmative command, we just put the A ending because remember, we only went to the ea usted form of the verb. That's all we're going to cover today. We will practice this in class. Hasta luego.